I will be doing my presentation on Owl Moon, written by Jane Yolen and illustrated by John Schoener. I'm going to start off by giving you a bit of information about the author and the illustrator. Jane Yolen was born on February 11, 1939, in New York. Her father, who is Will Hyatt Yolen, was a journalist and wrote for columns for New York papers. Her mother, named Isabel, was a social worker as well as wrote short stories, crossword puzzles, and acrostics. Jane attended college at Smith College, where she excelled and won many awards related to writing. When she graduated college, she moved back to New York, where she became an editor and eventually a children's author. Her first book is called Pirates and Petticoats. Since the publication of this book, she has written and published 378 books, including 221 for children. Jane currently lives in Western Massachusetts, next door to her daughter Heidi, who Owl Moon was actually written about. Because Jane has written so many books, it was hard for me to pick awards to include, but many of her books have won the Caldecott Medal, 2 Nebula Awards, Christopher Medals, World Fantasy Awards, just to name a few. And she's also been given the Association of Jewish Libraries Award and the Catholic Libraries Medal, as well as a few Lifetime Achievement Awards. 6 colleges and universities have given her the honorary doctorates for her body of work, and she jokes that she should have 6 doctors in front of her name. And I found it so amazing how many awards that she has won and how many people recognize her as such an amazing children's author. Because Jane has written so many books, it's hard to narrow down her most notable, but her most famous 3 are Owl Moon, which we just read, How Dinosaurs Say Goodnight, which is actually a series and it has other books such as How Do Dinosaurs Say I Love You, and then her most recent book, published in 2019, is about a little boy and his obsession with the moon called A Kite for Moon. The illustrator John Schoener, like Jane, was born in New York City. He first learned to draw because he wanted to communicate with his friends who spoke other languages. His father was German and his mother was Hungarian, and his family only spoke German in the house, so it made it difficult to communicate with other people in their neighborhood. After high school, he attended the Pratt Institute, where he was mostly interested in photography. Something I found interesting about Schoener is that he actually failed nature writing because he was concerned about the accuracy instead of just self-expression. Before starting to illustrate children's books, he did a lot of work in the science fiction genre, and his work in Owl Moon won him the Caldecott Medal in 1988, and unfortunately Schoener died in 2010. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the genre characteristics of contemporary realistic fiction. Anderson's book talks about different themes within realistic fiction. Specifically, this book talks about the theme of family and focuses on a child's experience with one parent. More of a traditional family account is present in this book as opposed to a dysfunctional family. Also, this book contains aspects with personal issues such as that feelings of cold, not seeing an owl at first, wanting to feel a sense of belonging with her brothers that the main character struggles with throughout the book. This book is about a little girl whose pa takes her owling, something she's been waiting to do for a long time. And realistic fiction books often have a social reality theme and personal issue theme as what this is about. This book contains many interesting quality characteristics as well. Yolen uses figurative language, onomatopoeia, and the use of repetition in her book. She uses figurative language such as metaphors and similes to create imagery in the book. She talks about how the trees stood as still as giant statues, which creates an image of the trees being so big and so still. The train whistle is described as long and low like a sad song, and that creates a sound in your head of what this might sound like. Lastly, she says that the snow is whiter than milk in a cereal bowl. With along the illustrations, it creates a good image in your mind. Yolen also uses onomatopoeia to create sounds, specifically with the owl noises, and this is seen throughout the whole book when Pa is calling to the owls. And then lastly, she uses repetition. Repetition is present to emphasize certain phrases, such as, if you go owling, you have to be quiet. This is repeated throughout the book multiple times. The literary and visual elements that are present are very interesting throughout this book as well. The 4 main literary elements that I wanted to talk about throughout this book are character, setting, point of view, and plot. So starting with the characters, generally they are pretty flat throughout this book. The main character doesn't actually undergo much change to be considered a fully developed dynamic character, and we never actually get their name as well. The setting is given pretty vague, but it says it was late one winter night, and we are given the woods also as a setting, and it covers the time span of one day. The point of view of this book is, although we never learn the character's name, it is first person point of view as the unnamed main character is narrating throughout the whole book. And then readers of realistic fiction will find first person as the primary point of view, which I thought was interesting that this is a pretty common point of view throughout the whole genre. And then the plot follows a linear plot. It has a clear beginning, middle, and an end, as opposed to episodic or circular plots. Schooner creates many beautiful visual elements throughout the book, so starting with space, the illustrator uses negative space, specifically having the foreground white using snow, and dark colors in the background with the trees or the woods in order to draw attention to the front of the book and the characters. The illustrator also uses shape. It is very interesting in this book because it varies a lot. There's not really one shape that the illustrator uses. Specifically with the trees, the reader is offered various height and width to create a perception of the setting. Sometimes it's a bird's eye view, sometimes you're in the foreground, sometimes in the background. It kind of depends. And then color is also used. The illustrator uses a lot of contrast between light and dark colors, again, to create an emphasis on the characters or the owls. It just kind of depends on the scene in the book. Now for the theme and why I chose this theme for Owl Moon. I chose self-control as the main theme of this book because the narrator constantly has a very difficult time being quiet, and when Owling, the author constantly stresses the importance of being quiet, and so the narrator is learning how to practice her self-control and to be quiet despite the urges that she may have to talk or laugh throughout the woods. This is a great theme for children because it is a skill and practice that they are able to incorporate in their own lives, whether it's school or their family lives or their social lives. Practicing self-control is an important thing for them. And now for my personal response to the book. I really enjoyed reading and responding to Owl Moon, and it allowed me to engage with the text in new ways and analyze the book with more intent than I usually do. I also really enjoyed learning about the author and the family aspect that this book brings for her. And it also allowed me to gain a new perspective on relationships in my life, and while observing that the seemingly ordinary things and realizing that these too can be special. Okay, and lastly, my discussion questions. My first question is, are you able to connect this book to your life? Is the relationship the main character has with their father similar to a relationship you have with your parents? And then the second question, what age group do you think would most benefit from this story and why? Third question, what do you think this says about the family dynamic of Jane Yolen's family based off of how she wrote the characters? And then lastly, do you think that some students may react differently to this book, and why do you think that? And then lastly, here are my works cited. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation on Owl Moon.